In recent years, we gamers have been treated to a buffet of wonderful remakes of hits from years past. From childhood favourites like Final Fantasy VII to survival horror classics such as Resident Evil 2, many of our beloved titles have been rebuilt from the ground up, allowing younger generations to experience these fantastic games for the first time and letting us relive the magic all over again. With all that said, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of titles from previous generations that have been lost to time, and unless we're fortunate enough to own a collection of retro consoles or can successfully emulate them, then it feels like we'll never get to experience them ever again. So here it is, our list of demands to the games industry. All we ask is that you remake these titles so we can finally get that serotonin rush that comes shortly after a hit of nostalgia, and once it's done, we promise to let James out of the cage unharmed. I'm Peter from Triple Jump, and here are 10 video games that deserve a remake. Number 10. SSX Tricky. A great philosopher once wrote, "It's tricky to rock a rhyme. To rock a rhyme that's right on time, it's tricky." Yeah? No? Okay. Released in 2001, SSX Tricky was actually the second title in the SSX series of snowboarding games, but it is undoubtedly the one that sticks in players' minds. Not only were the gameplay and graphics superb, but thanks to the catalogue of outlandish and gravity-defying tricks that were on offer, the whole thing was a ton of fun to play. Additionally, each character had a distinct personality that got players invested in their journey to the top. They were all brought to life by an outstanding voice cast, and it was the uniqueness of each snowboarder that made SSX Tricky so much more than just another sports game. It's been over 2 decades since SSX Tricky was released, so unless you happen to have a 6th gen console lying around, there's little chance of having a go at the game these days. So come on EA, we know it's effort, but think of all the possibilities a remake could have. Just bring the game up to date and give the people some additional tricks and interesting new characters. Just for the love of God, don't you even think about adding microtransactions. Number 9. The Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. We know that getting Todd Howard to focus on anything other than Skyrim is about as likely as Team Triple Jump relocating to, I don't know, the moon, but hey, we can dream, can't we? I actually don't want to go to the moon, it sounds cold and scary up there. Indeed, as much as we long for the Elder Scrolls 6, or to be able to play Skyrim on a toaster, it would really be nice to revisit some of the earlier games in the franchise, only with a few modern touches, and we feel like Morrowind would be a great candidate for a remake. The second that players stepped foot onto the island of Vardenfell, the whole world was their oyster. There was no obligation to complete any of the main missions, and instead players were free to wander as they pleased and pick up whatever quests they fancied. The game is 20 years old though, and it does show, so what better way to celebrate all that it achieved than by giving it a shiny remake? Just imagine how many more folks would be able to enjoy the splendour of Morrowind if it got a new engine, updated graphics, and if all of the bugs and glitches were ironed out too. Yeah, that's probably worth doing. We know you have the resources to do it, Bethesda, you just need to put Skyrim's 11.5-year anniversary edition on hold for a little bit, okay? Number 8. Revelations Persona, Persona 2 Innocent Sin, and Persona 2 Eternal Punishment. The great thing about remaking a game as opposed to remastering it is that the developer is starting with a blank canvas, meaning they're free to keep all of the stuff that was great about the game, but alter the things that need modernizing. With this in mind then, we feel like the first 3 Persona games, confusingly titled Revelations Persona, Persona 2, and also Persona 2, would do well if remade. Admittedly, all 3 games did get remakes in the late 2000s and early 2010s, however, they only released on the PSP, and frankly, we don't think it would feel right to play them on our Hannah Montana Special Edition. Many Persona fans were brought to the series by Personas 3 and 4, and so it seems fitting that if the first 3 games were to be re-released for a new generation, they should get an aesthetic upgrade that's more in line with the franchise's current style. Obviously, we'd expect the games to retain the same characters, story, and central gameplay mechanics. After all, you can't have Persona without Personas, but we see no reason why all of that couldn't be repackaged into something that's more familiar to today's Persona fans. Number 7. Star Wars Jedi Knight Jedi Academy. Fans of Star Wars and its many video games rejoiced in 2021 when it was announced that a remake of Knights of the Old Republic is in the works. At time of recording, developer Aspyr hasn't confirmed when the remake will launch, only that it will be a timed exclusive for the PlayStation 5. Sorry, Xbox fans, but at least you've still got Bethesda, so there's that. We're not content with just one Star Wars remake though, so in the spirit of striking while the iron is hot, and some other idioms, we propose that someone somewhere gets to work on a remake of Star Wars Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy. The game follows Jaden Korr, a student at Luke Skywalker's Jedi Academy, as they investigate a cult of Dark Force users known only as the Disciples of Ragnos. Over the course of the game, Jaden learns various different Force powers and must ultimately choose whether to remain on the light side or turn to the dark side. Players very much enjoyed the fact that they could wield a lightsaber right out of the gate, and that they were given the freedom to tackle the game's missions in whichever way they saw fit. The game did suffer from some technical issues though, but they could all be resolved with, you guessed it, a remake. Get this done, LucasArts. I need it now. Number 6. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. It's unfortunate when a good game is marred by technical problems at launch, because even once they're resolved, it's all that sticks in anyone's mind. When Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines was released in 2004, technically speaking, it was a hot mess. Players complained of lengthy load times, errors in on-screen text, dumb AI, and bugs that crashed the game altogether. Behind all of its failings though, Bloodlines was a triumph of the RPG genre, and critics applauded it for its sheer scale and variety of choices that were available to players. The writing was outstanding, the voice acting was stellar, and the narrative was deep and engaging. As we speak, a Bloodlines sequel is in the works, though it has been repeatedly delayed. Clearly though, there is plenty of interest in the franchise, so it makes sense to us to remake the original, only without all of the technical problems that detracted from its brilliance. The game got so many things right, and with a developer at the helm that's willing to take the time to sift out all of the rubbish parts, gamers old and new would finally get the opportunity to experience the game as the masterpiece it should have been almost 20 years ago. Number 5. Beyond Good and Evil. Now before anyone asks, and I'm reading these words verbatim from the script, Tiny Peter did not insist on Beyond Good and Evil's inclusion in this list, and no, he did not promise any kind of swift retribution if it, for whatever reason, got cut. That sounds more coded and threatening than it really is. Our writer is fine, I promise. In all seriousness though, we've actually got quite high hopes for a Beyond Good and Evil remake. At time of writing, a prequel is in development, although if it's not in development hell, it's certainly in development purgatory right now. But that aside, a Netflix show is also in the works, which at least proves there is plenty of interest in the franchise as a whole. A remake wouldn't even be the first time that Ubisoft went back to Beyond Good and Evil either, as in 2011 it received an HD remaster that gave the whole thing a new lease of life. You can only tart up the old gal so much though, and so even the 2011 re-release is looking a bit dated these days, and we reckon it's high time the whole thing was fully reworked. After all, even though it didn't sell particularly well upon its initial release, it got a great reception from everyone that did play it, and it would be a real shame if it were to just fade into obscurity simply because its visuals don't hold up so well today. Number 4. Silent Hill. With the success of the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes, it's clear the world still has an appetite for old-school survival horror. So it's baffling to us, frankly, that Silent Hill still doesn't have a remake over 20 years after its initial release. Alright, fine, it's not completely baffling. After all, the nasty breakup of Hideo Kojima and Konami basically screwed any hope for a sequel, and the publisher's reluctance to even make console games at all means we are, most likely, right out of luck when it comes to getting a Silent Hill remake. Still, we'd love to see it, because although the game was rather cutting edge at the time, its gameplay hasn't aged particularly well, not to mention the fact that it's impossible to play if you don't have a legacy console or emulator. With a ground-up rebuild, not only would the game get the release onto modern systems it so desperately deserves, but it would also mean that audiences would get to enjoy detailed new character models and environments environments, an updated camera system, and improved controls. We do mean a complete rebuild as well, especially considering how little care and attention went into Silent Hill HD Collection. We won't settle for another shoddy remaster, Konami. I don't care if you do send Pyramid Head after me. Oh no, I was joking, you do whatever you want, I don't care! Number 3, Jet Set Radio and Jet Set Radio Future. If you thought that roller skates, graffiti, and saving the world from evil corporations have nothing in common, then you clearly haven't played Jet Set Radio or its sequel, Jet Set Radio Future. Both games focus on a gang of teenage skaters called the GGs who use wheelie feet and spray paint to stick it squarely to the man. Each game was incredibly well received by critics, who were impressed by their art style, soundtracks, and gameplay mechanics. Sadly, Jet Set Radio Future didn't do so well commercially, and it was these poor sales figures that were a good part of the reason it never got a sequel. The games have since developed something of a cult following, however, so we can't help but feel like a remake of the duo would go down better with fans than an ice cream sundae on a warm afternoon. Though the cel-shaded art style certainly prevented Jet Set Radio from aging as rapidly as its peers, the blocky environments and angular NPCs could certainly do with some modernizing. And since we're now rebuilding the whole thing, it's decided, why not throw in a character creator, open up the world a bit, and chuck in some side quests for good measure? Oh, the possibilities are endless. Number 2, Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem. It really pains us here at Team Triple Jump when great games sell poorly, as was the case for Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem. Released in 2002 for the Nintendo GameCube, Eternal Darkness sits at a whopping 92 out of 100 on Metacritic and won several awards, but it still sold less than 500,000 copies worldwide. Despite its commercial failings though, Eternal Darkness has gained a cult following, all of whom would no doubt be ecstatic to see this mind-melding adventure get a new lease of life. A continuation of the series is not for lack of trying, certainly on the part of writer and director Dennis Dyack, who has on several occasions expressed interest in returning to the series. He's even attempted to crowdfund a spiritual successor, since Nintendo owns the actual IP, but to no avail. With the success of other M-rated games on the Switch, plus audiences' revived interest in survival horror in recent years, it feels like the right time to remake Eternal Darkness so that it can get the love it deserves. It would also open up the doors for a developer to have lots of fun with the game's sanity mechanic, which frequently broke the fourth wall to mess with the player. What could be more disconcerting in the midst of a nightmare scenario than your TV acting up or the game threatening to delete everything off your console? Well, I'll tell ya, modern versions of those things that you're not expecting, because this is a remake and they've changed it up a little bit. Oh, how unexpected and spooky, I don't know what's going to happen next! And number 1, the TimeSplitters series. Hang on a minute, I hear you cry. You can't have an entire series in the number 1 spot, that's cheating. And to this I say, it's my list and I will do what I want. Developed by British studio Free Radical, TimeSplitters was a trio of excellent first-person shooters that told the story of the temporal war against the titular TimeSplitters, a bunch of creatures that can travel through time and disrupt human history. All 3 titles received critical acclaim, and in June 2007, rumours began circulating that a 4th title was in development. Sadly, all was not well behind the scenes, and Free Radical was closed down in 2008 before TimeSplitters 4 was finished. Luckily, publisher Deep Silver announced in May 2021 that Free Radical would be reformed with many of its original staff, with the intent being to bring the much-loved TimeSplitters IP back to life. And as much as we'd love a new game in the series, we do also long for the nostalgia of years past. The first game was a PlayStation 2 exclusive, and TimeSplitters 2 and Future Perfect only ever saw releases on the PS2, original Xbox, and GameCube, meaning our options for playing any one of the games these days are severely limited. What we wouldn't give to see the beloved franchise brought up to date with shiny new graphics and optimization for the current generation. I suppose we can dream, or learn how to become TimeSplitters ourselves so we can go back to disrupt human history and, maybe play a bit of cheeky TimeSplitters while we're there.